And I can pass it over. Okay. Hello, those of you who are watching this as a recording. This is the EPPP Coaching Circle. I am Dr. Jordan, and we are joined by a guest speaker today, Dr. Erica Ligons. And I'm just going to go ahead and pass the mic to Dr. Erica Ligons. So
Wonderful.
I think all I need to do is just mute myself, right? And then you can present as needed.
Okay. And about 30 or so minutes, right? And then we'll get into other things. Okay. I will do my best to manage my time well. So I'm really excited to be here with everyone today. My name is Dr. Erica Ligons. I currently live in Chicago, Illinois, but I'm an East Coaster at heart. But I moved out here to Chicago for my graduate school program, and I decided to stay because even though the winters are terrible, the city's really great. So I took the EPPP about 5 years ago. Yes, about 5 years ago this year. And I had previously been working in community mental health, working with youth, children, adolescents, and their families, predominantly Spanish speaking. I am bilingual. And it was so amazing and so rewarding, but so taxing. And recently, January of this year, I made the switch into joining a group practice. And I think in a few years, I may actually want to open my own practice, but we'll see. But, one step at a time. So I am really enjoying it. I'm back working primarily with adults and some adolescents, seeing a wide variety of presenting issues. And, making this transition this year was just such a blessing because it would have been extremely challenging to be in my other setting had I been doing that during a global pandemic. So I am so grateful that I bit the bullet and made that switch this year. And I'm grateful also to be fully licensed to have been able to do that, which is what brings me to why I'm doing this EPPP coaching. So if we rewind back 5 years, I was doing my postdoc actually at the same community mental health center. And I actually have ADHD and attentive type. So I always tell people that up front because I want people to know that studying in school was not necessarily easy for me. It didn't come natural. I always had to really push through those inattentive issues to be able to get to where we are now. I also never had done well on any type of standardized test ever until this time. And so studying for me was not super easy. And to top it all off, living in such an expensive city like Chicago, doing my postdoc at a community mental health center, let's just say things were tight financially. And I was all on my own, doing everything on my own. And I had an immense amount of pressure on me to pass this test the first try, because even though I had a job lined up at the community mental health center to stay there, there was a significant pay difference depending on if you were licensed or not. And with student loans coming into repayment and whatnot, there was just a lot of pressure for me. It even was hard just to get the money together to even take the test. So I give you all of this backstory because I really want people to understand that this process was not easy for me. And I was just as anxious and overwhelmed by the process as anyone else. I'm not some sort of genius by any stretch of that. So I started studying for the test. I intended to do it at the beginning of 2015. However, just by reading the study books and actually seeing them, I used AATBS because it was included in our tuition package. Just seeing the amount of books and knowledge that I was going to need to obtain and seeing some of the recommendations of how to go about attacking all this material overwhelmed me and was so overstimulating. I literally curled up in a ball, cried myself to sleep, and did not look at the materials again for 2 months. I then decided, okay, I have to start studying because the year is flying by. So I started studying again, didn't have a clear plan, felt like I was all over the place, studied for maybe a month, then literally hit a mental wall, couldn't even go near the books, couldn't even open them. I was so overwhelmed. I confided in someone who had been the postdoc the previous year, and I knew her from school. She sat me down. She gave me a couple tips and a few of her study materials. And from there, I was able to figure out a plan that could work for me and that would help me to be able to attack this material and not feel so overwhelmed. So in April of that year, I started studying really hard. I studied the recommended hours that one should study over the course of about 4 months. I went and sat for the exam, and I passed on the first try with a 659. And again, none of that process was easy. I was plagued with anxiety the whole time and had to work very hard to manage it, but I did successfully pass the test. Over the few years after that, people started coming to me here and there asking for advice. And last year, when I was transitioning into this group practice, a colleague of mine said, you should really think about coaching people more officially, because when I sent my friend to you for advice, she said whatever you told her was really helpful. And maybe you should do that. And so that's how I started doing it this past year, just casually starting to coach people. And now I coach probably anywhere from maybe 8 to 12 people a week I'm coaching, and it's been really fun supporting people in this journey. This test carries a lot of power with it. It's a difficult experience to come through, and I've just been so excited to work with people and support them on this journey. So that's a little bit about me, how I got here. Now I would like to share with you some things not to do when studying. Now, when I work with people individually, this information that I'm about to give you is something that I go over with people in not our first coaching call, because our first coaching call is really, I call it a diagnostic call. It gives me the opportunity to learn more about them and see what their studying has been like, what roadblocks they're hitting, and helps me to kind of figure out what is going wrong. Or if they're never tested before, to help prevent problems before they start. Now, once we officially start the coaching, the very first call I do includes going over the information I'm about to give you. Now, there are 12 what I like to call common pitfalls or don'ts of studying. And these are things that I literally just heard over and over and over again when talking with people who had multiple attempts at the test. Or sometimes people too would have never had tested as well. And after just so many times of hearing these things over and over again, and then sitting down and comparing them to the way I went about studying, it was very clear to me that the way I went about studying canceled out a lot of these don'ts, which I think is a lot of the reason why I was successful in passing the test. And so I want to share them with you, because if you have fallen into these patterns, now you can begin to understand why it's not working. And hopefully it'll make sure that you don't keep repeating it, or potentially repeat other common pitfalls that you may not have even fallen into yet. Okay? So before we start, I just want to get a gauge on who do we have on the call again? I'm not familiar with this platform. You all have to work with me, bear with me.
Awesome. Yeah. So if you're not familiar with Cisco WebEx, you have an option for your layout where you can just focus on the person speaking. You can do what's called the stage, right, which is like the person who's speaking big and everyone else small at the bottom. Or you can also do a grid where everyone's the same size. So if you see that layout option and you click on grid, you'll be able to see everybody the same who's sharing their video. And if you, but I can tell you who's on too if you're not seeing everyone.
Okay.
So
I
Dr.
see a
Jordan,
couple people on the bottom.
Okay, you see a couple on the bottom. Good. So I guess to some extent I can let individuals introduce. Maybe I should let people introduce themselves. I'm going to let people introduce themselves. Rachel, please introduce yourself.
And tell me where you are. I just would love to know your name and where you are.
Hi, yeah, I'm Rachel, and I'm Dr. Jordan's intern right now. And I'm currently living just north of Vancouver, Canada, but I will be moving back to California soon.
Wow. Yeah. I've never been to Canada. I want to go to British Columbia one day.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Heard it's really pretty out there. And that's the West, right? I think.
That's where I am, yeah.
Oh, nice. Wonderful. Okay.
Yeah.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah,
nice to meet you too.
I do. I invite my interns and the practicum students from California Women's Therapy to attend because they will all be probably studying for this or a very similar exam at some point in their future. So it's a really helpful experience, especially the guest speakers are amazing and also the content, right? They're learning and gaining experience. So I invite them to attend. And then we have two of our official members of the group on as well. Deborah, are you open to introducing yourself a little bit next?
Yeah, hi, my name is Deborah. I'm currently living in Las Vegas, Nevada, but my primary residence is California.
Wonderful. All these lovely West Coasters. I like it. I'm jealous of your weather. Oh gosh, it's so cold here.
And then Kim is on as well, and I can't tell from the login which Kim is on because we have multiple Kims. So Kim, if you could let us know which Kim is on and share a little bit about yourself, that would be helpful as well.
Okay, I'm Kim. I'm the first Kim that joined Dr. Jordan's group, and I live in San Diego, California, and yeah, and just to FYI, Dr. Jordan, I finally did get in touch with the board, and my application was extended for 6 months, so I have to the end of April to take the test.
That's wonderful. Good for you for finally reaching out, and I'm glad that the result was what we had hoped, that you were given that extension.
Yes.
Amazing, and helpful for others to know as well, right? Not to be scared to ask for an extension if your application deadline, if your deadline to take the test passes. Crazy times. They're being flexible with us, which I think is really, really wonderful.
Yes.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for allowing me to do that little pause so I could just kind of interact a little bit with who I'm talking to. So great. Well, now we can jump into things. Wonderful. So first and foremost, one of the most common reasons why people end up unfortunately not being successful in the test is due to under preparation. And sometimes this can be related to, number one, just not studying at all. Sometimes people go into the EPPP and they think, well, I'm just going to wing it. I'm just going to see how I do. I would not recommend that because it is a very difficult test. The questions are very obscure and it can just really throw someone for a loop. But I would say that does happen where people kind of just figure, I'll just go take it and see what happens. Or sometimes people just aren't aware of how much they should be studying. The experts say about 3 to 4 months, 15 to 20 hours per week is a good general range of how much time one should put into it. And when I've talked to people who have had failed attempts, it's not uncommon for me to hear that, maybe they only studied about 5 hours a week, or maybe sometimes 10, or maybe it fluctuated. Gold star one week, 15, 20 hours. The next week, maybe not really looking at it very much. Now, sometimes these fluctuations in study schedule can come to because of either just low motivation. I mean, you all know it takes a lot of mental effort to study for this test. And most of us have other things we're doing in life. We have other goals. We have other responsibilities, maybe areas of our life that were totally put on a shelf when we went to graduate school that now really need some attention. So we're balancing a lot, and not to mention we're just exhausted. So sometimes it just can be low motivation. Or another thing I often see is people studying for a very long time for their study attempts. So for me, generally speaking, 6 months, I think, is the absolute cap of how long you would want to be studying for this thing, because it is just extremely difficult to maintain the level of energy, focus, and motivation to do this essentially part-time job that doesn't pay and is not fun and requires a lot of mental energy. And so a lot of times I'm talking to folks and they're like, yeah, I studied for a year or 8 months or 9 months. And again, when we really dive in and I get really nitty gritty of what was going on, again, the studying during that time was very on and off, very lackadaisical, and it just didn't give them the content knowledge that they needed. So that I would say would be the first one, is just under preparation for those different reasons. Now, I always say, I'm like, every time I get to one of these, I'm like, oh, this is the one. But really, often I'm seeing a combination of these with folks. And number two and these aren't in order of like the most common. I just wrote them down as I was hearing them. Number two has got to be one of the most common though, which is taking the test before we're truly ready. Again, no one wants to study for this test. It's boring, it's exhausting. And so oftentimes people study for a few months. They're using whatever method they're using to study. They study for a few months and they look at their test scores, and we're seeing that their test scores are quite low. But again, due to just exhaustion, pressure to need to sit for the exam, due to family pressure, work pressure, whatever kind of pressures there are, sometimes people just go ahead and they take the exam anyway. It's not uncommon when I'm talking to some of my coachees that their previous practice test scores sometimes are like in the 50s or very low 60s. There's quite a large gap to get to the passing score on the practice test, but they're kind of pushing themselves to go do the test anyway. So I think it's really important that when we walk into the test, we walk in with a level of readiness that is going to really set us up for success. I know in my personal experience, and I want to be clear though before I say this, that practice tests, of course, are not 100% indicators, of course, but they're a nice, like, I don't know what the word is, general gauge. I definitely have heard stories of people who never passed a practice test but passed the real one. And when I coach my people individually, I talk about what I call grades of readiness. I would say when I went into the test, I was grade A level of readiness, meaning my test scores, I was passing them with cushion. I felt very comfortable with material. I felt knowledgeable about the material. And I was able to manage my anxiety, which is the secret sauce. I'm telling you, being able to manage your anxiety around the test. So if you work with me individually, we'll talk about how to know when you're ready. But a lot of times when I'm talking to people, it was very clear when we look back at their test scores and just their overall feelings and level of depth of knowledge of the content that they really just were not ready. So that would be number two. Number three, improper rotation of the topics. You know, this test is difficult because it's got, 11 or 12 different domains of information. Of course, some have more heavily emphasized than others, but nonetheless, you're basically learning a course worth of material for each domain. It is a massive amount of content. And when you're studying this amount of content over the course of 3, 4, 5 months, trying to, first of all, get it in your brain and keep it in your brain is a challenge. And so what I find is that due to just the overwhelming nature of how much content there is, oftentimes people are struggling to figure out the balance that can help them to learn it all and maintain it. It's kind of like when you see those expert jugglers and they've got like 8, 10 clubs in the air, in some kind of way they're just like keeping their eye on all of them and they're keeping all of them from falling. That's a lot of what this is like. You've got like 11 domains in the air that you're juggling and you're trying to keep them all up at the same time. And a lot of times we find ourselves falling into the trap of maybe overemphasizing on areas that don't need as much emphasis or vice versa, or we're not looking at the topics in enough frequency to be able to retain. Because let me tell you, everyone, that, retro and proactive interference, that is a very real thing. And also, again, just with time can cause us to forget and for things to fade. Now, number 4 is very much tied into number 3. A lot of the time, what I have found, the reason why people are struggling to find a good system of how to juggle everything is because their emotions are very, very, very involved in this process. In fact, one could even say their emotions are guiding their study process, which is not necessarily the way we want to go about it. Now, oftentimes I've seen folks who will either lean really heavily into certain areas of the test because they feel very insecure. They feel like it's not a strong area for them. They feel anxious about it. And so they overemphasize that area, even if it's not necessarily an area that is heavily influenced on the test or represented on the test. For example, I've met some coachees where they're spending hours and hours on stats because they're just so anxious about stats. But they might only get 8 questions, 10 questions on the test about stats. And ignoring other areas like IO, which is so boring. Well, unless you like IO. That really is not, like, we need more focus there. Or sometimes people like to study what they like. So if they find that they're strong in certain areas, they're like, let me just look through that some more. And they'll avoid, again, out of anxiety, avoid some of the content areas where they really do need to spend more time. Now, the next one I would like to talk about is how to use practice tests. Oh, practice tests. There's so many things I have seen around how people utilize practice tests. So first of all, a common mistake I see is people either underutilizing or overutilizing practice tests. Sometimes I've seen instances where people didn't use any practice tests before taking the real test. So I want you to think about real life examples. Like I don't know if anyone likes to go to Broadway plays or musicals or something like that, but just imagine if that theater company studied their lines for months and their very first run through the show was opening night. That show probably wouldn't go very well, even though they've been studying their lines for months, right? You have to act it out and do it and run through it in real time and feel it out so that when opening night comes, you're ready to go. The same thing with athletes, right? They do scrimmages, practice games, because it's not just enough to do practice all the time. You've really got to get on the court, really see it through and run through it. It's the same thing with studying. Now, another area where people sometimes get themselves into trouble with tests is they hyper focus on them. They hear from people who have passed, oh, you got to take practice tests. You got to take practice tests. So they're like, great, I'll take practice tests. And they take 100 practice tests. They take the same ones over and over and over again. And sometimes they make the mistake of looking at the increase in score after taking the same test over and over again. And they confound that with, oh, this must be an indication that I know this content. But that's actually not really what's happening. What's really happening is that they're memorizing questions. And they're assuming that they know more content when they really don't. I've talked to quite a few folks that they'll tell me, I just don't understand why I failed. I was taking practice tests and I was getting 90% on them. Like, okay, I scored 659 on this test and I never got a 90% on a test. But I also only took all my practice tests one time. And usually when I start asking them questions like, okay, well, how many times did you take that particular test? Oh, that was my 3rd time. So what we're seeing is practice effects. So we have to be very careful. Another thing that people do with practice tests is they take them at the wrong intervals. Again, let's go back to when we were in school. Usually the semester starts, you get introduced to tons of content over the course of, what is the average semester? Like 15, 16 weeks, something like that. About halfway through, about week 8 or so, you get a midterm, right? Which tests you on all the information that you've been exposed to since that time. Well, what a lot of people are doing with their practice tests is they're taking them right at the beginning. And they're taking them over and over again before they've really got an opportunity to really learn, rehearse, and retain that information. So again, imagine if you were in school still and one of your professors says, I'm going to give you the midterm on week 3. Even though you haven't seen any of the content from week 4 to 8, because we haven't got there yet, but I'm going to test you on all of that in week 3. how well would you do on this test? Pretty poorly, right? So that's a lot of times what people are doing. I see people in the Facebook groups, they'll be like, I don't understand. I keep getting so low on these test scores, and I took another one and it's still low. And I'm like, stop taking them. It's important to do them at the right intervals. I know for me, I personally took a diagnostic test in the beginning to see where I was. I took kind of like, I would say, a midterm in a way after I got through a lot of the content to give me a second baseline to see where I was. And then I began taking tests at a particular interval from then until the time I took the test to build up my test taking skills, help me build up my mental energy to have to sit for 4 hours and take a test, and to give me more feedback on how to fine tune. So practice tests are super important, but you have to make sure you're using them at the right time. Which also brings me to another issue that I see with practice tests, which is that practice tests have to be treated like real tests. They must be closed book. You are not doing yourself any good by taking practice tests open book. And I think that this relates back to personal habits and emotions and feelings around this test, which if somebody only would have told me how much this test was not about the test and this process, but about dealing with your own personal demons and shortcomings and everything, because it's really not just about answering questions on the test. What I find is, obviously, if you're walking around with a doctoral degree or some type of advanced degree, you are clearly a driven person. You clearly have done well for yourself academically, and you might even be a little type A, which is not a bad thing. However, if we don't manage that, it can cause us some problems. And what I have found is for the folks who do practice tests open book, they're often driven to do it because they don't like the feeling of getting questions wrong. They don't like seeing themselves failing at something. So please don't do that. Don't do questions open book. You really do need to test your knowledge and take it as a learning experience. Also, sometimes people put way too much pressure on these tests. They see it as like, if I get this wrong, this means I'll never be ready for the test. A lot of catastrophic thinking can really come out when we're doing practice tests. So it's really important to remember practice tests are just that. They're practice. And you're not meant to do, well, except for when you get really close to your readiness for the test, you're not meant to do super well in the beginning. It's really there just to be feedback for you. Okay, number 6. This has got to be another major thing that I see, which is relying on passive forms only of studying. Now, reading through content and listening to audios is so amazing. And I would say that probably was about a third of my study hours were doing more passive forms of studying. But I tried to make them as active as possible. Like when I read through my content, I wasn't just reading, I was highlighting, taking notes. When I would listen to audios, I would be pausing them frequently to recite back what I just heard, to restate it in ways that I could understand using different terminology to deepen the level of encoding of the information. So it wasn't just sitting around listening to stuff. It was very, very, very active. So what I find when I listen to people, when they describe their study process to me, it typically goes a little something like this. They start with a particular domain. How they pick that one depends. Again, it could be based on emotion. It could be based on whatever. But they pick that one. Then they read through all the content or listen to the audios for that domain. And then they do some test questions at the end of that week or however long they focused on it. And then they put it to the side. And then they go to the next domain. Sometimes they'll take notes, sometimes they won't. Then they'll go on to the next domain. They'll kind of do that. Well, if you study over a 3-month time period and you go to take the test and you haven't seen the content from week 1 since week 1, where is our level of retention going to be? Especially when our only exposure to it was a one-time read-through or one-time listening through audios. Now, I know some of you might be thinking, but Erica, I listened to these audios multiple times and I read multiple times and I'm still having trouble. Well, of course you are, because it's so much information. I remember reading the AATBS books. I know, like, the DSM chapter, I think it was like 50 pages. 50, like, who can read, even if you read it over and over and over and over again, it's so much information coming at you that there's just no way that you can retain that. We really have to break the content down into small bite-sized pieces that we can rehearse over and over again. And it must be in a way that works for us. I see people sometimes being like, using flashcards, for example. They're like, I hate flashcards. I'm like, well, why are we using flashcards? Well, my friend gave it to me and she said it helped her pass the test. I'm like, well, that's her. You're someone else. And I know I loved my flashcards, but flashcards are not for everyone. So we really have to figure out what's going to work for you. But the key is to break the information down into smaller pieces and rehearse the information in a very active way, active and meaningful way, at certain intervals throughout this 3 to 4 months so that your brain can learn it and retain it. And that's one of the things I teach when I work with people individually, is I really teach them how to do that process, how to juggle it all. Okay, we have a couple more. Let's see. Number 7 is ineffective stress management techniques, or being in the wrong mindset around studying or the test itself. Now, this is huge. Again, so much of your success on this test has nothing to do with content knowledge, but everything to do with how you manage your emotions around it and any insecurities or negative beliefs that it's bringing up about you or your abilities. Again, coming from someone with attention issues who had never done well on standardized tests, trust me, I had plenty of negative thinking. But during the course of my study process, all throughout that time, as well as game day, I utilized strategies that worked for me to help me to manage all of that and work through my anxiety. A lot of people don't do that. They get really entrenched in their negative beliefs about this test to the point where it totally deflates them, keeps them from studying, keeps their motivation down, because this test process brings up all sorts of emotions. Everything from anxiety, of course, feeling overwhelmed by just the sheer amount of content, feeling angry, that you even have to take this test to begin with, right? Because it's stupid and it doesn't mean anything about who you are as a clinician. And sometimes we get so stuck in those feelings that we end up in a state of despair, just complete and utter despair. And if we get stuck there, then it's going to impact our studying, our ability to retain information, and of course, our performance on test day. I've talked to many coachees who during the test, when they see questions that are very convoluted, they get so freaked out. They have not practiced skills on how to manage that. Their anxiety goes up to a 10 out of 10. And then they crash back down and become totally deflated and literally go through the rest of the test kind of just checking boxes. Just let me just get this over with. And they check out mentally and emotionally, get through it. And then, of course, the result is never good, right? When we go through it like that. So it's really important that you're aware of what emotions and thoughts are coming up for you during this process and develop appropriate coping skills to deal with it. And it's also important to make sure we have realistic expectations about the test itself. We have to accept, I swear, radical acceptance has been the term for the year 2020 because so much stuff has happened this year that we cannot change, we can't do anything about, and that's just like how this test is. It's super important that we accept that this test will always be convoluted. It will always test on things that make no sense, that you're wondering where they pulled it from. And that's just how it is. And I see people getting into this trap of, well, if I just study more, if I just do this or that or the other, or if I keep taking it, I'll get the version of the test that's better. No. I personally, my last practice test, I think was like a 76 or 78%. I was passing them with no problem. When I went to go take the real test, I kid you not, about half of the test, I was guessing. Some were educated guesses, some were, I don't know what that was, but I just did my best. And I would tell myself, oh, that's one of those weird 50 questions that they're going to throw out. That was one of my coping skills during the test. I'm like, oh, that's one of those tests or those test out questions. They're going to throw that out. So no matter how much you prepare, you're still not going to know everything. So just to wrap up with the last couple, pacing issues during the test is also really important. Time management. Sometimes people are flying through this test. They're barely reading the questions. Other times they're mulling over the questions, spending way too much time. If you're on either one of those extremes, I promise you it is definitely hurting your score. So that's another thing I talk about with my coaches is how to go about taking the test, breaking it down so that they can pace themselves effectively through the test. Now, it's important as you're studying for the test, make sure that you're realistic about how often you can study, how much you can study, what time of day you can study. If you are a natural night owl, do not tell yourself that you're going to get up at 4 a.m. and study. No. Do not, after seeing 8 clients or something like that, think that you're going to come home and study for 5 hours. You won't. Or if you do, nothing literally will get retained. So you can waste that time if you want to, but it's just time will be wasted. So it's important that we know who we are. Because of my ADHD, I knew once I got home and I'm a night owl, I knew I was not going to study in the morning. Forget that. That's crazy. For me, anyway. I have another coachee, though. She gets up at like 5 a.m. I'm like, how do you do that? But that's her, and it works for her. I knew I had to study as soon as I got home from work. I literally even kept my work clothes on because I knew the moment I got comfy, put on PJs, forget it, it was over. So you have to know yourself. The last couple, make sure that you are studying during, I don't want to say a good time in your life, because when is ever a good time to sit and study for this test? But you definitely don't want to be studying when you have tons of transitions you're going through. I don't think it's a good idea to try to study while you're planning a wedding or, while you're in your last trimester of pregnancy and you're preparing for a baby. You have to know when is the right time for you. And this is a very common trend I see. To the point where it's one of the questions I ask now when I have people who have had prior attempts. I'm like, okay, what was going on in your life? Of course, I don't pry too much in people's personal business, but what was going on? And I hear all sorts of things. I was moving. I was getting married. I had a baby. I was caretaking for an elderly parent who was dying of cancer or something like that. Or I went through a personal trauma, then took the test the next day. I mean, I hear all sorts of things. So it's important that we not try to push ourselves to study when it's really not the right time. Even this year in 2020, has turned people's lives upside down. And for some people, this has created a perfect scenario for them to study. And for other people, this is literally the worst time they could ever study. 2 more things. It's important to make sure that you have a study schedule. Many of the people who I've worked with who have had failed attempts do not have a study schedule. And as the old saying goes, if it's not on the calendar or on the schedule, it won't get done. If you want to have consistency in your hours, you need to have a study schedule, and your support system needs to know it. I've made beautiful schedules with people, so beautiful, and they keep it to themselves. And then when their partner comes to them and they say, oh, honey, you want to go out to eat? Or this or that or the other, or the kids are bothering them, they can't get any studying done. It takes a village. If you have children, a family, you and your spouse need to sit down and have a meeting. Listen, I need to study every night from this time to this time. You need to bathe the kids, do whatever you got to do so I can study. And I say this really directly, especially to my female coaches, because my mom struggled a lot with this, really relinquishing control and allowing other people to help and take care of things so that they can focus on the test. And then they end up just leaving the test for last all of the time. Last but not least, having too many study materials. I see this a lot where people, especially if they've had multiple attempts, they pick up study materials along the way. They keep trying different companies, and then they have such a mass of study materials. It's so overwhelming they don't even know where to start. I've literally had people pull out their study materials for me during the video calls, and I literally feel nauseous looking at all of these binders and different notes and stacks of, oh my God, it's like we got to streamline. Sometimes less is more. So those are some of the most common things I've come across when I've seen people who unfortunately have not passed the test, or sometimes people who have yet to have a test attempt because they are putting off the test, they're not being consistent with studying, what have you. So I hope that information was helpful, and perhaps we can do some questions maybe.
I would love that. Thank you. Thank you so much. And to clarify, should I be calling you Erica, Dr. Ligons? How do you want to be addressed in this meeting?
Erica, Dr. Erica, or even Dr. E. Some of my clients call me that. It makes me feel cool, so I don't mind that either. Any one of those is fine with me.
Okay, Dr. E. I like it. We had a Dr. J when I was growing up as one of my teachers, and I thought that was so cool. I thought that was fun. Okay. So Dr. E, I thought that was super helpful. Definitely echoes what I've seen working one-on-one with clients, and also as the kind of moderator, facilitator of this group. You've hit on probably all of the struggles that I've seen individuals struggle with, and also just such a great point that there isn't one like secret sauce, right? There isn't one way that is the winning way to tackle this exam. It's about each individual knowing themselves and knowing what works for them, and seeing what missteps they may have in their path, and kind of removing those obstacles so they can get where they need to go. I did notice that we had another member join on, a new member, another Kim. I don't know if she goes by Kim or Kimberly. If you're in a place to introduce yourself, that would be fantastic. You can unmute your mic. But please know that we are in the recorded section of the session, so whatever you share is going into the recording. So choose how much you want to share given that information.
So I'm Dr. Kimberly Matthews, but Kimberly Kim is fine. And I've attempted to take the EPPP a few times. I'll just leave it at that. And everything that you were saying is very true, and I could probably relate to almost all of it. So I'm just excited to be part of this group, and hopefully I can conquer this once and for all. I do have 6 children, so that it's not going away. So, but I will get through it. It's the only thing left. I finished everything else but this licensure exam. So.
Wow.
Thank you for sharing.
Thank you. Yes. And oh my goodness, 6 kids. As you can partially see ahead, I've got my one kid with me today due to COVID-related childcare concerns. And the struggle is real. The struggle is real right now. Even in normal life, trying to balance family and career is a struggle. And in the pandemic, I know it is even more so. So amazing that you're reaching out for the support. And I do think we have a lot of tips, tricks, strategies, and support that we can offer. I'm so glad to have you. Thank you so much for joining. And then to
Thank you for having me. Sorry.
Yeah, awesome. And then to kind of open it up for questions, I know there was one individual who sent me a question in advance, but I can kind of hold that until the end. I wanted to hear kind of what questions we have from members who are on with us live today. And just as a reminder, you guys control your own mic. So if you want to share, unmute yourself, and if you're done talking, remute yourself. I don't like to be the muting police, so please handle that on your own. Awesome. Okay. So questions, and just if you've got one, go ahead and unmute your. Okay, so I'll start us off with the one that came in then. One of the members who is not on with us live today said, okay, she's been in the group for quite a while. She's feeling close to ready. She's set her exam date, and she wants to know what are the tips, what are the strategies for that last month, right? What should she be doing differently as she's really going into that test date? So I was hoping maybe you could share a little bit with us about that.
Oh, absolutely. So I actually do an hour-long call with my coachees about, I call it the final crunch call, which is all about what do you do in that last 30 to 45 days before the test. So off the top of my head, I can think of a couple of things. Number one, this is when you need your coping strategies the most. I don't know about you, when I hit purchase about 30, I think I purchased my test about a little over a month before I took it. It was like someone lit a fire under me. It was like also the anxiety went, it went from being this looming thing in the distance to like, bam, this is happening. So this is when you need your coping strategies the most. I talk a lot with my coachees around positive thinking, different rituals and things, again, that's personalized to them, that can help them keep their mojo going and deal with the inevitable anxiety that will spike during this time. So this is the time to cope. That's number one. Number two, I would say this is the time where we use our practice tests. This is the time where you want to be taking practice tests frequently so that you can practice those test taking skills, get some immediate feedback on where you're still kind of struggling a little bit or where you need to hone in and clean up. I call that last 30 days is really our honing time. Ideally, you would have a really strong grasp of the material. You'd be close to passing or around passing practice tests. So this is really the time to hone in and give you an opportunity to tighten up anything that needs to be tightened up and really overlearn any of the content that you already know. So that way, that was kind of my strategy. It was like, I want to overlearn this content so that when my anxiety spikes during the test and cortisol is out of control and whatnot, my emotions are all over the place, that I can have this content knowledge so well rehearsed that I could like do it in my sleep. So that would be the other thing, is to take those tests. Another thing would be, especially the last few tests you take, again, think of yourself as a Broadway star. You've got to do a full dress rehearsal, literally even down to what you wear. And I know that might sound like, why do I have to get all those details? Again, your emotions are going to be really high. The last thing you want is the day of the test for that little tag on the back of your shirt to be itching you just the wrong way and taking your attention off. Also, you need to be mindful of practicing your pacing strategies and when to take breaks and all of those things. I know for me, I did not take a bathroom break on the halfway through the test. Big mistake. It was so distracting. And when my next break finally came, I was like running to the ladies' room, and that, you don't want those extra variables bothering you. So think about that. Another top thing I can think off the top of my head would be to make sure you're rotating the topics frequently. So at this point, you should know the content very well. And so you should be able to jump from content to content area and constantly be rotating them during these last 30 days, again, for that honing process. I have talked to so many people who they come to me like a month before their test, and I start asking them, okay, so what does your studying look like in the last month or last few weeks? And they're like, oh yeah, I haven't studied clinical in like a month. And I'm like, oh my God, your content knowledge is probably really low in that area now because you haven't seen it in a month. And this is not the time for us to still be learning content. This is the time to be, really refining our content knowledge. So it's so important that the topics are being rotated in a particular way. And when people work with me individually, I really try to teach them the general framework that I followed. I always say, I provide the framework, you paint the picture. So you are going to make it really personalized to yourself. So I would say those are my top 3 tips for the last 30 to 45 days. Any other questions?
Thank you. I loved that, and echo it all. So good. And so if anyone has a question, right, just go ahead and unmute your mic, but I'm gonna fill in the gaps a little bit if people aren't popping in with questions. You know, I started this EPPP coaching circle realizing that people needed more support, especially during this time, right? This is something that was launched during the pandemic. Because I know it is, like you said, you kind of want to avoid those challenging times in your life as your study time, but that's not possible right now. Right? We don't know how long this is going to last. I had a sense from the beginning it was going to be a while, and you don't want to put off studying for your licensing exam for years. Like, no. Like we want to get this over with and help people get through and stay supported and stay encouraged, despite the fact that we're living through really, really challenging times. And I think one of the things that I've realized in running this group since I think April we launched is that as much as I want this to be a one-stop shop, right? As much as I want this to be like we can get everything you possibly need in this one hour a week, it isn't for everyone, right? Some people need that individualized plan, right? It's not just the content they're needing help with. It's not just the general strategies. It's some of that. The emotional roadblocks, the anxiety management, the overcoming imposter syndrome, the figuring out the work-life balance, dealing with the relational issues, to be able to have the childcare, to be able to set, like, it's more complicated than just let me teach you IO. It's more than that. And I'm seeing some nodding, like, yeah, it's hard. And as much as I want to be able to address all of those things in a group format, it's hard. You really can't. And so I think part of me bringing in guest speakers is to allow participants, sorry, my daughter's climbing, allow participants to explore different providers and kind of what they offer in terms of one-on-one services, allow people to discuss what study materials they're using, other study groups, if they have study buddies. Ariel, can you not climb on me right now, sweet pea? Mommy, stop. Yeah, the struggle is real, right? Wait, this is what life is like right now. So I'm happy for people to have met you and to hear a bit about what you offer.
Mm-hmm. You know, I'm actually so glad this is happening right now. I really am, because this is everyone's life right now. This is so representative, especially, is it Kim with 6 kids? God help you.
Yes.
I know you are busy over there. Can I ask the age range, like the youngest to the oldest, just out of curiosity?
Yes. So my oldest is almost 17 and my youngest is 3.
Oh my God.
So
wow.
17 to 3. Yes.
Oh, so you're doing it all, from bath time to homework to looking at college, maybe even?
Yes. And I do have 2 with special needs too. So I just want to get through this, and it's trying to retain the information, and then I feel like I retain it, and then I come back and I feel like I've lost it. So
yeah, I really liken this process of learning all of this content to, like, as if someone was going to, like, lose 100 pounds. It really is, like, slow and steady wins the race. Like, if we work out a lot one week and then don't the next week, it's not going to transfer over. It really is like a slow and steady process. And I think that's where a lot of people really struggle, because we're just so tired. We don't want to go through this anymore. We feel like we put in our dues, we're done, and we just want to be done and over with this. And so sometimes really just sitting with this process and dealing with the emotions around it are the hardest thing. And so one of the things that I really talk about with my coachees, and sometimes they don't always like my answer, is like, is this really the right time for you to be studying? And I'm not talking necessarily to you, Kim, right now, more just like general people. And if so, what do we need to put in place? What do we need to release? What do we need to give up or put to the side? Who needs to step up and step in? I've had coachees whose family are stepping up, doing everything from cleaning their house to cooking their meals, helping with childcare, even sometimes helping people financially so that they can take some time off from work or reduce their hours so that they can focus on studying. So I'm very heavily systemically oriented in my clinical work. And so I approach my coaching the same way. We talk about your support system. How can they help you? Even if they don't live near you, if you're someone who's a person of faith, can your family pray for you? I mean, we have to take all the help. Can they send positive vibes? Can they even call you, text you, hold you accountable? Like, we need the village to come together and support people, especially during this difficult time. So it's really important to have good communication with your significant others or your support system so that everybody knows what you're doing. I don't know if a lot of people here are like me who are first generation college students, but I don't come from a family full of doctors and lawyers who understand what it's like to go through that kind of process and then have to take a bar exam on top of it, or a medical board exam, or all the other kind of exams people have to take out there. And so sometimes family, bless their hearts, they're really trying to be very helpful, but they just don't fully understand all of what this takes. And so it's so important to have communication them and to let them know what all this is about and how they can help. They may never fully understand it, but they can at least understand how they can help.
It just makes me feel so grateful that I took this exam pre-kids and pre-husband. Like, I was single when I was studying, and like I like that made a huge difference, right? I was able to
it was hard enough then.
It seems so simple. You just set your schedule and follow it. Right? Like, I know that is not the reality for most of our members who are studying. There are full-time jobs plus and family obligations and sick parents and
mortgages,
children with special needs, and natural and forest fires and pandemics and you name it, all of these things, and people's own medical challenges and own anxiety and so many pieces. And I think and I hope that the EPPP Coaching Circle has done a nice job of helping people break down content, right, and make the material seem less daunting and more friendly and easier to digest. But some of the other pieces, just the figuring out how to kind of live through studying, is, I think, I think people still need that support and more of it. So at some point soon, I'll be sending out information. We're also launching a support group, so separate from the EPPP Coaching Circle, not to be recorded, an actual support group for individuals who are pre-doc, post-doc, and studying for the licensing exam, because it is all hard. It is all hard. And I think that was my experience, was that those years are kind of the most difficult, more so than practicum, or kind of when you're studying in your classes, when the clinical work gets real and the exam is looming. I think it's a really, really hard time for our profession. So I'll be sending more information out to the group about that support group, which is going to be launching in February.
Absolutely. And if I can add something on there, for those of you going through this process, if you've had some breakdowns around this, some real emotional breakdowns, please know that you are not alone. So much of this is not about the test. It's just what this test represents and what it means and what's tied to it. And there's just so much pressure. And so please know that if you've had some intense emotions around this, that's normal, which is one of the reasons why with my coachees, I'm asking on day one, are you in therapy? Because everybody needs some therapy during this process. And again, you might think like, oh, I me, whatever, I'm reflective. No, this test brings up things that you would never ever think about. In fact, I would love to come back one day, Dr. Jordan, and talk about the problem with passing.
The problem with what? You cut out.
The problems with passing, which sounds like very, like what? Like
the fear of success, right? Fear of success.
Absolutely. And what it will mean to pass, and some of the sort of subconscious things that people might be battling through that have them afraid of actually passing this thing and being done. So I would love to talk about that one day. And that was not something that, this has been such an eye-opening experience for me, because when you talk to people from so many different backgrounds and whatnot, there are just so many things that have come up that I've learned that I never thought would be a part of the coaching process, but I'm seeing that it is. So yeah, that'll be a future topic for another day.
Yeah, it's huge. I think could be its own session. The fear of success could be its own session. Imposter syndrome, which we all I don't know anyone in the field of psychology who does not have that. It seems to be something that we all go through in terms of becoming therapists. Yeah, and much more. I would certainly love to have you back. So I'll pick your brain in terms of days and times that would work for you. But I'm curious for now if individuals who are on the call today or who are watching this recording later, vibe with you and are excited and want to learn more, how do they reach out? What's your pricing? Or how do they find that information? What would you like to share with the group?
Yes. Is there a way to type on here or? Yes,
there is a chat box. And so on my end, it looks like that little text bubble, like if you're texting. Does it pop up if I say hi? Are you seeing it in the future? There's like a participants button, and if you click on that, it'll bring up the participant list in the chat.
I see. Okay. Oh, but you know what? If it's a recording, I'm not sure if people will have access to that. So how about I put my information on the screen really quick? And then I'll share the screen, and then that way people can kind of see my information from there. Give me 1 second. It's live TV. We've got to roll with it.
Yeah, I can also send out a post right in the Facebook group with all of your contact information, and I hold on to that. And you're on our website too. The drjordan.com website for the EPP Coaching Circle has a guest speakers tab. So there is information about each of our guest speakers. And I think we've put a link to your website at the end of your bio. I will probably add your email address as well if you're comfortable with that. You can add that as well.
Yes, because I have a business email that I use. Let me see. I'm going to share my screen really quick.
Great.
And hopefully this will go okay. Okay, can you see my information?
You did. You did it.
Okay, wonderful. So I'll just let that sit there for a second, and then people, of course, when they're watching this, I'll give everyone a second to take down the information if they want. And then anyone who's watching this on a recording can just, of course, pause or whatever.
Perfect.
Okay, I'll give it a couple more seconds. Of course, again, you can go to Dr. Jordan's website and get my information there as well. All right, I'll stop sharing now. Okay.
You're getting an opportunity to learn to use Cisco WebEx. I really like this software. I know it's not the one that people use as often, but I've been really happy with it since we landed on. We went through a few at the beginning of this program. We went through like 3 or 4 different softwares before landing on this one. But I know it can be new for people. So, but great work navigating it with us today. I think I'll give one more opportunity to see if anyone else who is on live has any questions. either for Dr. E. Yeah, Deborah. Hello.
So you were talking about the last 30 to 45 days. You mentioned number 2, practice tests frequently. When you mean frequently, are you meaning weekly or every other week, or what are your suggestions there?
My suggestion, depending on how many practice tests you have and whatnot, ideally, I would say weekly. So I took AATBS has, I think, a total of 8 tests for their thing. I took every single one of them. Now, I will say, though, the very last test you take should be about 2 to 3 days before the real test. That one, again, is your dress rehearsal. Full on, wear your hair how you would wear it, wear the clothes you think you're going to wear, eat the food you think you're going to eat, go to a location that feels test-like. I know that in a pandemic that's not always possible, so find a place, just work with your situation. But that test, if let's say you've run out of fresh tests, it's okay for that test to be a test that you've taken before, because the point of that test is not about getting feedback on how you're going to hone your studying. Because when you get 2 to 3 days out, I mean, either you know it or you don't at that point. You're not going to do that much more at that point. So it's okay to take a test you've already taken before, because it's just for the purposes of going through the exercise of it. Because also, it gives you an opportunity. It's almost like exposure therapy. It gives you a chance to get used to seeing questions you don't know, get used to the feeling of, oh my gosh, I don't know this, and being able to tolerate that, breathe through it, and pull whatever content knowledge you do have to systematically deduce the right answers. So many people, they get so freaked out when they see questions they don't know, and they just give up. Or they spend too much time. So this is another reason why taking the test weekly, it's desensitizing you to the testing process. So when you walk in there on game day, that test taking muscle, the muscle memory is there.
Yes, and then rotating the topics for the last 30 to 45 days. When you say rotate topics, typically does that mean the quote big 6 that PrepJet has more than, if you've covered all 11 domains during that last month, should it be the big 6, or what are your thoughts?
So my thought, and again, I hope I don't overwhelm anyone when I say this. And again, if you work with me individually, I will be supporting you. I even make schedules of people who are going to study this domain at this time. We get really detailed so that they don't feel overwhelmed. But generally speaking, I would say somewhere around 75% of your time should be spent on the big ones and the other 25% on the little ones.
Within 1 week.
Within 1 week.
Gotcha.
Which is, again, why if you, prior to that last 30 days, if you've done a really good job of getting a strong base of content knowledge in each area, then when you get to that honing period, you already know so much of it that you can get through it faster and be able to touch all of the topics in 1 week within 15 to 20 hours. Does that make sense? Because you know a lot of it. And of course, the more you know, you're going to go through it faster because you know it.
Understood.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Thank you for asking the question. I appreciate it. Don't be shy, everybody. I'm here to help.
So I know another question that we get a lot anytime we do a guest speaker is in terms of which study materials to be using. And I know you had cautioned against, don't use 8 different companies at the same time. That's maddening. And it sounds like you personally were an AATBS person. I was personally a psych prep person. We've got a lot of people using PrepJet. Have you worked with clients using any other study programs? Do you think they're all equally fine as long as you're using them appropriately? Kind of what's your take?
Okay, so I can speak openly about the ones I like and don't like, right? Okay.
I'm not sponsored by anybody. You can shape whatever you want. Yeah.
Okay, good. I'm is anyone going to come for me?
No.
So my opinion is, with the exception of the Taylor method, because I've just never heard anything good about that ever. I think you can pass and fail with any of them. Again, it's all about how you break down the material and how you review it actively over time in a systematic way that makes sense. And that's where a lot of the problem is, which is why people will think that the study program is the problem and they'll keep trying different, but they're using the same approach every single time. I've even had people who, paid for the AATBS workshop, had all of the notes of like, this is what you need to know, and they still fail because they're not going about studying in a way that allows for them to deeply learn the content. Now, with that said, I have preferences. So I am an AATBS girl, I guess you could say, because that's the one I used. I didn't know any better. Psych PrepJet didn't even exist at that time, from what I understand. A lot of people say it's super dense. But it is paper. I was more of an old-fashioned kind of gal when it comes to this, where I liked paper, and I didn't know anything else. So when you kind of don't know anything else, it worked fine for me. But again, it was, I think, a lot of because of my approach. Now, I think AATBS is fine. I think Psych Prep, I have heard that they don't update as much as some of the other companies, but I have heard excellent things about their audio. So sometimes my coachees, for example, they hate PrepJet's audio, but so they'll do like a PrepJet, but then like, I'm going to buy Psych Prep's audios, and I will allow that. I don't allow too much other stuff because I see people get like, what is it called? Paralysis by analysis, where they're just so overwhelmed, or they see inconsistencies in the content, or they see that one company, emphasized more things than another company, and they just get so frazzled and overwhelmed. So, that's the most amount of mixing that I advocate. Now, PrepJet, again, I cannot speak about it personally, but from what I'm hearing from my coachees, it seems to be the most streamlined, the most concise. I hear the audio is terrible, though, because it's like a weird computerized voice. It's pretty terrible. But other than that, the summaries are really great from what people say. Also, I like how the tests are broken down, and each area is broken down with subsections within each area. I think AATBS has started to do that. I'm not sure, though. But a lot of people just really seem to like PrepJet, and they seem to be pretty well done and constantly updating things. I mean, I've talked to people who get back on PrepJet after like 6 months off, and they're like, oh my God, there's all this new content. I mean, they're like on it with it. And I think because it is more online based, they're able to update like that versus the old fashioned companies who use printed materials, right? So there's pros and cons to all of them. You can pass and fail with all of them. And I typically, when I talk with people, we try to figure out which one we think is going to be the best fit for them.
Right. I think that's a great point, and that's been my take as well, right? It's not necessarily the materials, it's what you're doing with them, right? It's how you're using what you've got. And I did play around with PrepJet, right? They have like a free week trial, so I did it just to kind of see the experience. And it's that like voice to text thing, right? You like hit play and it's the robot speaking.
It's horrible.
So that's not ideal unless you don't mind it, I guess, or if you're planning to read it, print it or read it on your own. The materials themselves are well updated and concise and well organized. With the Psych Prep audio, it is Dr. Sharon Jablon, who we've had as a guest speaker, and I really like, probably because I listen to all of the audio, so I feel like I know her, right? She feels like a friend, even though I've never met her before. I really like the way that she presents. And then likewise, I think the materials, even though we don't, we're not a comprehensive test prep program, but the presentations we put together, it's mainly me and my interns and guest speakers speaking. And I think we must be better than a robot. We must be more entertaining to listen to, if nothing else. So I think it is about putting together something that works well for you. The audio was really fantastic for me when I was commuting, right? When I was studying, it was back in pre-COVID when people had commutes. And so I got a lot of studying done in the car, and that was really, really helpful. now my car sits for like 3 months at a time. So that would no longer be an effective study method for me at this point in my life. So finding kind of what works for you and making the most out of it. So that's really
and I think people have to like think out of the box. Like if you used to commute for 40 minutes in the morning and listen to stuff, maybe you walk now for 40 minutes in the morning. And hey, now we're getting some exercise in. So it's 2 birds with 1 stone. So we have to kind of figure out how to make this work during this crazy COVID time. But yes, I used to, oh my gosh, every single day listening to those AATBS recordings over and over again. And then eventually I made my own recordings of myself talking, which was also really helpful. And I remember the last 30 days I went crazy and I would listen to it on the way and home from work because I'm like, this is the final stretch. I've got to do this. The day I got to listen to the radio going to and from work, it was like, ah! After 30 days of listening to that for an hour, oh my gosh. I
remember that too, being like,
voice.
there's music on here. It had been so long.
Yeah, it was pretty crazy.
Yeah, awesome. Okay. Any additional questions before we wrap up today?
I would say the audio again is very helpful for me. I do the psych prep audio along with the prep jet, but now I can't listen in the car. I can sometimes, but my children get tired of it. So,
I'm sure. That's so interesting. I have a little one too. So the ear pods have been like a lifesaver because I can listen to a webinar or something and she's listening to something else. My husband and daughter are watching cartoons or something else loud and I'm doing something professional in the same space. And that has really been helpful instead of feeling like I needed to, try to be reading while they're watching. It was harder to kind of double task in that way or just kind of losing that time. So it's all kind of finding what works for you.
Mm-hmm.
Wonderful. Okay. Well, Dr. Erica Ligons, Dr. E, thank you so much for being on with us today. I thought this was a really helpful, fun chat for today. And for those of you for bearing with me for my childcare challenges today, this is not typically the case. Usually when I record, it's just me in an office. So I appreciate everyone's understanding that I didn't have childcare today. I think it's still ended up being a very useful session. Dr. E would love to have you back. We'll be in touch to kind of figure out days and times that would work for you. And for the members, feel free to reach out to me. We're kind of creating a little roster of other EPPP coaches and tutors that are available. And the support group that we're going to launch soon as well to be able to provide more support and not just these webinars and recordings, because it is a challenging task and a challenging time, and we want to be able to provide all the support that individuals need to be successful. Awesome. Okay.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you all so much. We'll see you again soon.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Bye,
Bye, everybody. Enjoy your weekend.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.